All right. I left the house. So I've been working at home for roughly 2.5 years. Ever since our transition to work from home, I never really had the need to go back. And luckily for my company, they haven't requested us to be in the office yet. So at this point, I'm still continuing work from home. And that lends itself to a unique environment because when I'm presenting any drawings to our client, I've been so accustomed to presenting him on Teams, Microsoft Teams, that is. So when I present on Microsoft Teams, I can show the drawing and it usually minimizes my camera, but most of the time I actually don't even have my camera on. So basically the client just sees my drawing, which like I do a screen share. So they would see my screen, I would be presenting drawings, and I would just be talking to a microphone. But this milestone was big enough that we wanted to see the client in person at their site. So we went over there, shook hands, sat in the room with like all 15 of us, and we presented drawings live. Like I stood there and I actually talked to the client while presenting the drawings. So about like 5 minutes in, one of the clients asked a question that was mildly amusing to me. And unfortunately, I have gotten used to being able to put myself on mute. So this couldn't mute for some reason. And I almost kind of laughed a little at the question because of how obvious the answer was. But it was, again, obvious to me. And that is a level of professionalism that I used to have. But having worked from home for 2 years, that started to slip. So there's a lot of things that you don't do at an in-person meeting that you might be doing at a remote meeting. So here's 9 practical advice that can help you present drawings or just have a client meeting and have everything go a little smoother now that you may be transitioning to more in-person meetings. All right, so number 1 is to organize your drawings ahead of time. Now, when I mean organize, I don't mean put them in numerical order. So, your first page, your page number 1, sheet 1 doesn't have to be first. Put them in chronological order of how you want to explain your design. So, personally for me, I like to start with my single line diagram because we are an electrical group and the electrical department handles power. So, if I'm presenting an electrical design, I'd like to start with a single line diagram that highlights the basic structure of the distribution system in the building. So I would start off with single line diagrams, and then sometimes I would go to a site plan first to explain how the power gets to the campus. Then once it gets to the campus, I will switch over to floor plans, and then that floor plan will explain in greater detail about how all the power trickles down to your load. So that seems to make a little bit more sense to the client. If I were to have followed my numerical organization, it would be something like floor plans, lighting plans, and then you get to like single line diagrams and then maybe site plan at the end. So it's a little out of order, but that's not how we should be restricted on how we want to present our information. You should be able to reorganize your drawings in a way that makes sense for the client because that's what you're trying to explain for. A useful feature when you're organizing your drawing is to put like a title or a page break. So essentially it's a blank sheet or page that states what's coming next. So the opening one, I always have a big white page that just says single line diagram. Then I'll present my diagrams, and then there will be a break that says site plan. So all the drawings after that are going to be site plan. This allows your client to kind of mentally prepare what they're going to look at next. And it also closes out the segment and it lets them know that if they have a question about the single line diagram, now is the time to ask for it before I move on to the site plan. That way, they don't try to keep holding on to their questions and thinking that you're going to answer it, but then you never get to it. And then by the end of your entire presentation, they might forget to ask you that question. These page breaks are really nice in that it groups your presentation into chunks, but it also gives the client a chance to ask questions after each chunk. All right, so number 2 is to bring a capped drink. So you want a lid because when you're presenting, sometimes you can get a little nervous or you're looking at the client and you're reaching for your drink and you'll knock it over. So take from me, you want to make sure your drink has a secure lid on it, but you need a drink because as you're talking, you're going to get dry mouth. And when you have a discussion going, like let's say your client asks you a question, and if it's a lengthy question, you can sip a drink. Staying hydrated is very important when you're presenting. Also, don't ever try to drink soda or hot coffee or hot tea because you don't want to take your sip of drink and just burn yourself on stage or something. So a closed bottle of water is your best stage companion. Number 3 is to write down the names of not only your clients, but everyone that attends the meeting. So usually in the beginning of a meeting, there is a round of introductions where everyone goes around, says their name, says their company, says their title, etc. And that's actually super important to pay attention to because as you're presenting, someone is going to ask you a question and you might want to glance down real quick at your paper to know who that came from. Did it come from the vendor? Did it come from a subcontractor? Or did it come from the client itself? So sometimes if your company's big enough, it could actually just be coming from another department that you don't know who that person is. It's kind of embarrassing if you ask that person later what's their name and who they are, because as the client looks at you, you're going to be like, you guys don't even know each other? You're from the same company. So try not to do that. I always like to bring myself a pencil and paper and orient this to match the room. So like if the front of the room's this way, well, I'm going to write, front of the room on this and face it at the room. Then it's going to just be diagrammatical. If the person over there is saying their name and their title, well, I'm going to write their name and title in this corner. And as we work our way around the room, it's just going to go in a circle. Then I just set this right in front of me, just the way it is. And if I need to start talking, I can just glance down and say, hey, Bill over here at this company is asking me a question, so I can address him. Then if someone else asks, it provides an extra bit of information, I'll know like, hey, that was from structural or that was from civil, because I can glance down here at my paper. This is super helpful and saves me from a lot of embarrassing moments. So what I write down is at least first name, last initial, and either company or title. So like if they just say their contracting company, great. If not, maybe they'll just say foreman or something. So I'll just write Bill G. Foreman, and that'll be it. I even write my own name down so that I know where I sat in the meeting, because sometimes I have a visual memory too. So I can remember in my head the discussion with this person sitting diagonally from me. But if I don't remember where I sat, it's not going to help me. So I actually put my name down on this chart as well. Number 4 is to pause when you're speaking. Reason for that is that you want to give your client, or anyone else really, the opportunity to interject and either ask questions or provide additional information or comment. So sometimes this can be a little hard to implement if you are a little nervous and you're kind of like the rambly talker. So you're just up there just talking, and no one can get a word in because you just keep going and going and going. Well, that's why I like to introduce those page breaks that I talked about earlier, because it gives you a natural stopping point. Like when you hit the end of your section and the next section's coming up, just remind yourself, pause, look around, and say, does anyone have questions before moving forward? And if there's silence and cricket, just be like, all right, thank you, let's move on. This tip is arguably the most important bit when presenting to the client, because you want the client's feedback. Like you're making all this effort to bring this design together and then you want to present it to them. Well, you want them to look at it and provide you with their thoughts. Does this make sense to you? Is this what you guys wanted? Is there anything we could improve upon? So this is your time to make your design better. And you don't want to wait until all the way at the end when the clients finally sat there for a week and look at it and be like, this isn't really what I wanted, but I didn't get a chance to clarify and talk to the person presenting it. So you want to open your doors, give them as much opportunity as possible to get their thoughts. It's the client's thoughts and opinions are very valuable, especially when you're working for them, right? So pause as you're speaking so that you give them a chance to ask questions. Number 5 is read the eyes. And what I mean by reading the eyes is you have to look away from the screen and actually look at the people you're talking to, because some people can go like this if they can't see what they're looking at, or they'll look very confused. So I always try to make sure that no one's like squinting, no one's like leaning in and everything, because on the screen you could just be zoomed too far out. Like as the person that made the drawings, I know what the drawing says, so I don't zoom all the way in all the time. So I might be like too far out and then they're like trying to read the screen from 10 feet away. So it's difficult for them and it strains their eyes. You don't want to make them strain because then they get grumpy and then it's never a good story. So if they're squinting and everything, you can try to zoom in a little bit. If they look more relaxed, then okay, you probably hit the spot. But if you start zooming in and they're like going, well, that means you probably looked at the wrong area. So you can also finish your spiel and present your statement for that drawing, and then turn around and be like, hey, Gus, do you have a question on this drawing? I see that you're trying to look at something. And they'll usually say, yeah, I want to look at this diagram and this portion over here. Can you go over there? Absolutely. So I look over there. I see that he's kind of like squinting and kind of looking like this. I'm squinting because his light is bright. But yeah, they can be sitting there like this the whole time. And then once you explain everything, they'll just sit back and be a little more comfortable. So I always try to read the people's eyes. It's hard to do on Teams and Zoom when no one has their camera on, or even if they have their camera on, it's so tiny that it's hard to see in the corner. But in person, you have the ability to read people's eyes and facial expressions and just body language. So make sure you look at that. Take a minute, look away from your presentation screen, look at your client, look at the vendor, look at your project manager, and make sure that you get a good vibe from what you're presenting. And if you see someone wearing sunglasses in the back of the room, you better run. Number 6 is speak in layman's terms. So don't try to go all into the science right away with everything that you're presenting. So as much as I would love to say this is a 1000 kVA substation with a secondary rating of 1500 kVA and this generator is 2750 kW, no one cares about that. So you just want to back up and say, this is your substation size for this building, and it's a double-ended one, so you have redundancy. This is your generator. We provide it full redundancy, so anything that fails, you have another one to fall back on. They want to know functionality. So as the client, give them layman's terms, give them description, give them the story of your design without diving into all the little details unless they ask for it. So if you have a maintenance personnel sitting there saying specifically, hey, what kind of breaker is that? Because we don't like this brand of breaker. Well, then you can give it to them and be like, all right, this is a square D breaker, HVLC, HVLCC cabinet. Do you not like the squishiness of it? If you don't, okay, let's talk. Maybe we can give you something different. But don't present all that detail to the client right in the beginning all at once. They're going to start falling asleep. Even when I present single line diagrams, I will sometimes draw a box over like a piece of equipment and just say, generally, here's your substation. Do you want to know more information on it? The exact sizing, how it switches, how many breakers I have? The answer is no, then that's good enough for me. The client will ask you what they want to know. Also, if the client has a special vocabulary they like to use for a certain thing, try to stick with it as long as it's correct, So, for example, we were calling generator power backup power, and this client liked the term eGen, so emergency generator. So they've been calling everything eGen power, UPS power, and normal power. So I picked it up and I switched over and I started to explain everything to them in that regards because I realized that was a trend. They really just wanted to know what was on eGen, what was on UPS, and what was on normal. So as I'm going through the single line, I'll be like, your substation is eGen and normal. It switches between the two. But then as you go further and further down, that's not on eGen because we're shedding that. That's on normal. That's on normal. That's on eGen. So that's the vocabulary that I picked up in the beginning of our discussion, and I carried that through to the rest of the presentation. And they could just understand that a little bit better because that's a word that they know, and they don't have to try to learn live in the presentation that backup power means eGen. No, just use their word. Like, I can flip back and forth between the two, so why not just use their word that they like to use? So basically, just be adaptive and speak in simple terms. Don't try to just inundate them with a bunch of numbers and all these heavy technical stuff. They can always look at the drawings themselves and dive into the details there when they're, have a coffee and more comfortable. But yeah, if you speak in layman terms, people won't fall asleep as much and you generally get through the material faster. So you don't take up an hour's block of time for just electrical. So number 7 is to look at your entire audience. Don't just zoom in on the one person. sometimes when you meet up with a client, you're meeting up with more than just one person. It could just be a group of people, and there might be a main person that it generally does most of the talking, but don't always just answer that person back. If you're making a statement or if you're explaining something, make sure to look at different people and make sure you include them all in on it, because it makes someone feel insignificant when they attend a client meeting as a client and no one ever speaks to them. They just speak to the person next to them, but they are the client. So make sure you look at everyone. And also, don't ignore your own team and your vendors too if they're in the room. So they are also there to participate. And if you make sure that they are included, they might actually answer a question or present something that might help you in the future. So just don't get tunnel vision on any single one person. When you're presenting to everyone. And again, the client is not just one person. It's several people. It's your company. It's the company that hired you. So make sure that you include everyone when you're talking and don't just zone in on one person. Again, having presented on Microsoft Teams for years, I just look at the screen all day and it's just like right in the middle. And that's all I talk to. So I lost that ability to just look around and address everyone in the room. All right, so number 8 is to take notes. Whenever I go to a client meeting or any meeting for that matter, if I'm presenting something, I'll have a presentation copy and then I'll duplicate that for a note-taking copy. So usually I'll say on the top like internal notes and then another one that says presentation. Then I'll just flip around to the correct one when it's my turn to present or if my turn to take notes. So the reason that there's 2 copies is because the internal note-taking copy, I'm going to type anything and everything that comes to mind during the meeting. So if someone makes a small change or a request, I'll definitely put it all on the internal one. However, some changes I might actually want to elaborate on when it's my turn, or I want to show that I have been paying attention and I have a relative solution to that. So for example, if the plumbing department were to present something and they presented a lift station out in the parking lot that I didn't know about. Well, on my drawings, on the internal ones, I say provide, 480 power at such and such load to this location on the parking lot for lift station, coordinate with plumbing. But on the presentation one, I'll actually draw a box and say coordinate with plumbing to provide power to lift station, and just make it nice and simple and just one little neat box and just put it right in the parking lot in the general location that they indicated. So when it's my turn to present, I can just be like, all right, so here's my design on the site plan, but also here in the parking lot, we're going to pick up this power for this lift station, and this is how I'm going to run power to it. So I can kind of run the idea by the client, and if they're okay with, exposed conduits, then good. But if not, then I'll be like, okay, I got my answer. I want to go underground. So it kind of like a little bit of a working session, lets them know you're paying attention, and you kind of have a solution that is kind of pre-approved. It's at least like they've seen it and they didn't totally object to it. So that's kind of the good thing about putting notes on a presentation drawing. But make sure that it stays clean. Like you don't want to put too much data. Make sure you draw a nice box and you make it legible, and then just present that. Like it's a presentable note. But on your internal note-taking thing, you can do whatever the heck you want. Just make sure you don't bring that up by accident. So sometimes I might even close it as I'm walking up to the stage. So it's up to you. All right, so number 9 is to stick around after the meeting. And that allows the client, vendor, subcontractor to get on a one-on-one discussion with you about anything specific that you might have brought up in the presentation or steps moving forward, or even to exchange business cards. If you're exchanging business cards these days, I actually cross out my office number because I don't have one anymore, and I actually put my cell phone number on there so that if they need to reach me, they can actually do so. The worst is to give out a business card with a number that you're never actually reachable on, so don't do that. And then, of course, finally rounding out the whole evening, make sure you thank everyone for listening to your presentation. Don't just thank the client. Make sure you thank your subcontractors, the vendors that showed up, just everyone that participated in the meeting. Meetings can resolve a lot of issues very quickly if you make the effort to do so. So hopefully you can put all of these practices to good use. A meeting can get very boring, it can take a lot of time, and you might fall asleep or start zoning out. But let's be real, a meeting is a very useful tool if you make it productive. So make sure you present the information clearly, you address them, you make people feel like they're part of the conversation by looking at them and asking them for comment. Then you can have a little working discussion, exchange information, provide some follow up action that you're going to do after the meeting, and then maybe even schedule the next one just to see how we progressed within the next few weeks. Thanks for sticking with me till the end. Hopefully you got something out of here that makes your meetings less awkward, more productive. And if you have questions, put them in the comments below and we can have a discussion down there. If you want to have further discussions, vote and stuff, or download things, or even get ad-free video, feel free to check out the Patreon link down in the description below. I'll be starting that up soon, and we'll be loading it with tons of useful features and also discussions as well. So some of my after-hour discussions, I might be talking to myself, make a video log. That'll be on the Patreon side. So go check it out, and if you're interested, I'll see you there. Thank you so much. Have a good one. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.